praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, but this was your good plan. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father. No one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal them. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Let's pray. Dear Lord, speak to us through the words of your scripture this morning. May these words pierce our soul, and they pierce our hearts. May they speak to us louder than anything audible that we hear today. May your presence increase in this room this morning, give this day, this time in our lives. We're continuing, for those of you who have been there or been here, with our walk through the book, The Pursuit of God, A.W. Tozer. 10-week series. We're in chapter 9, or week 9 if you prefer. The title of this chapter is called Meekness and Rest. If you recall, 2 weeks ago, we talked about restoration, or as Tozer puts it, restoring the creator/creature relationship. And what we talked about 2 weeks ago was going from seeing God as this incredible being who created everything and the outer expanses of our ever-expanding galaxy, and yet still cares to know us on an intimate level, and how incredible that is. And taking that, and this week we're talking about meekness and rest. So this week, it's taking that intimacy of how we can know that we are loved by Him, and changing our posture in front of Him because of this knowledge. Meekness and rest says that lifting God up requires us to bow down. God is not made greater through us being made greater. God's presence is greater by us being made less. And if you read through the middle of your bulletin, I talked a little bit about the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, Jesus Christ beginning Sermon on the Mount, the blessed are's. And the blessed are's, and I've said it on Sunday mornings many times before, the blessed are's are so countercultural to what we hear and what we see in everyday life. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the low, for they will be made high, is essentially what is being said, what Jesus is saying. But do we really understand how different and counterculture that is from our current attitudes, not only in society, but also in our church as well? I mean, Jesus taught that the kingdom of God belongs to those whose priority ladder is radically different than ours. Radically different. And this tension, on a very minor level, was renewed in my life this week. Last week we were camping out in Little Pine. It was a lot of fun camping over the weekend. We took a couple days before and a day afterwards. We came home from camping on Monday. And I think coming home from vacation has just got to be the worst experience in the world. I mean, as great as vacation is, coming home it's crap. Especially when you're camping. Not only do you have to, when you're camping, you got to clean everything up at the campsite, then you got to come home and reset it up to clean it up again for real the second time, right? So when we come home and we set everything up and we're doing this and that, and about 2 hours after we're home, maybe 3 hours, Laurie comes up to me and said, "You know, Scott, the refrigerator just doesn't seem very cold." And I thought, yeah, it doesn't. Last time I opened the door, it didn't seem very cold. And as we opened it, we realized the reason it didn't seem very cold is because there was nothing cold coming out of the refrigerator. The compressor in the refrigerator basically just bought the farm. Fortunately, we have a second, the church parsonage refrigerators in the garage. So we moved all of our stuff out there. We have tons of freezer space. Thank you to everybody who offered it. We didn't need it. It's good now. And then started the process of how do we replace this refrigerator? Because something that I struggle with on a personal level is what is the best way to use the resources that God has blessed us with financially for the future? So we need a new refrigerator. There's no doubt about that. We need a new refrigerator. I mean, we're not going to go down to the firehouse and buy ice for the next couple of years. That's just not going to happen. We want a refrigerator. But what's the best way to go? Do I buy a used refrigerator, which we have repeatedly done over the course of our 12-year marriage? That's why we've gone through 3 refrigerators. You can save a lot of money buying a used refrigerator, and you can get them relatively cheap. Do I get one of the cheaper new refrigerators? Right? And what's great about appliance stores is they will allow you to spend as much as you want on a new refrigerator. Like, they will make it available for you. There was one refrigerator, it was the most expensive one that we found at Lowe's. It was $3,200. And I'm sure if we'd asked, they'd have let us spend more on it if we wanted to, right? But I couldn't tell what was different about that refrigerator. You know what was different? Because it wasn't even as nice as some of the other ones we saw. It was a specialty size, so it only came out the same width as your countertop. A better refrigerator sold for over $1,000 less, but the size on this one was different, so they could sell it for that much. Unbelievable to me. But the reason I say is, what is the way to best use God's resources? Do I spend $1,000, $2,000 on a refrigerator, or do I send the money across seas where children are starving in a war-torn country? I struggle with that. I struggle with how to best use God's resources in my life that He has blessed me with, because it's not a black and white answer. You go through the same struggle every time you buy a car, every time you purchase a major appliance, or things along those lines. And that's an inherent just bashing. Where does God start and our society begin? Because I'm telling you, society's going to tell you, you need the nicest, newest refrigerator. And I had in my head, and to be honest with you, I still do, that I will not buy a refrigerator with a freezer on top. Because that requires me bending over 3/4 of the time. I'm not even that, 9/10 of the time. I'm not going to the freezer, I'm going to the fridge. And my back hurts, so it's physical. I obviously can't do it, right? There's a passage in Mark where Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, a group of Pharisees, and they get up into a debate about what makes a man clean and what makes a man unclean. And Jesus declares this. He says, nothing coming from the outside can make a man unclean. That's what he says to the Pharisees. And as Jesus so often does when he has these discussions and he talks with the Pharisees, he meets with his disciples afterwards and starts explaining his words. And this is what he says to his disciples. In Mark chapter 7, verses 20 through 23, this is what Christ says. What comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. For from within, out of men's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and make a man unclean. Do you understand what Christ is saying? What's fascinating about that passage is essentially what Jesus is saying, is all of our personal attempts at salvation, impressing God with our internal goodness. And if you've read, a couple of people have commented to me this morning that they read the Finding Faith column, of which I wrote the article for this week. And I'm not good at that, but it's all good, right? We feel like when we come to church, we have to have our act together. We have to be clean to come to church and get cleaned up, right? All our attempts of impressing God with our internal goodness and our character are exactly what repulses Him. Because out of the inside is what Jesus said is what makes Him unclean. We cannot find salvation on our own. It is not dependent on our sense of goodness, of right or wrong. It is dependent upon God's mercy. Jesus Christ Himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except who? Through me. When you place a rod, or a fishing rod, or a piece of steel, half in and half out of the water, you know what happens? Absolutely nothing happens to the rod. But you know what it looks like what happens? It looks like it bends. It looks like the rod bends in the water. It doesn't actually bend, but that's the illusion that's created. And I'm sure some scientists much smarter than I could explain to you why. Maybe Bruce has got a good look on his face. Ask him afterwards. He could probably tell you a lot more about this, right? But it appears to bend, although we know it doesn't. It appears that way because of the way we see it through the reflection of the water. It distorts its perception of us. The human mind is also affected in much the same way by our culture around us. And Tozer himself makes this statement. Pride, arrogance, resentfulness, evil imaginings, malice, and greed are the source of more human pain than all the diseases that have ever afflicted mortal flesh. And it's difficult to disagree with this assessment because not all of us in this room have had a disease of some sort. We've all been sick at one time or another. But to have a disease that affects the flesh to a great degree, not all of us have had. But we've all dealt with pride. We've all dealt with arrogance. We've all dealt with resentfulness and all the other things that he lists in between. And it's into this world that God sends his Son, Jesus Christ. A world of defilement, a world of brokenness, and a world of burden. What's fascinating, and one of the reasons I want to point it out, is at the beginning of the reading of our scripture today, I'm going to talk mostly about the last couple verses. But the very beginning of the reading, you know what it says? Read it again with me. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to little children. This was your good pleasure. Do we approach God's truth with a childlike wonder? I mean, with a radical and childlike trust in the God who can save us and in the God who loves us. I mean, and then it goes on, this statement of approaching like children is followed by what? The essence or the truth, as many of us would say, of Christ's existence. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. This is not an invitation for a select few. It is an invitation for every one of us. And then he goes on, come to me, all you who are weary, burdened, and I will give you rest. This is not for the physically weary and exhausted, or those who suffer different diseases or maladies of various kinds. This is not for the materially poor and less fortunate. This is not for those who are politically or religiously oppressed in our world. It is for the human condition which affects every person in this room. Let me ask you this question. Do you ever feel beat down by the life situation that you're in? Do you ever feel beat down by, maybe it's your job, maybe it's a relationship in your life, maybe it's your socioeconomic status, but you just feel beat down by your life situation? Or maybe you feel, as one of my children often does, that the deck is always stacked against you, right? I had those same feelings as a kid, and let me tell you, when I'm working on a construction project to this day, I feel much the same way, right? But you get those feelings of why doesn't it always goes this person's way, but why doesn't it ever go my way? The deck is always stacked against you. Does your past have a stronger grip on your life than it deserves? Are you haunted and controlled by what happened in your past? Or maybe the state of our world numbs you to the evils going on around it. If you're anything like me, I hesitate at best to watch the news anymore. And I'm a news guy. I like to read my paper every morning. But I get depressed by the evil in the world. I get depressed. I get mad when I read about a group that goes around beheading children. Like, that fires me up. It shouldn't happen. And I can't justify it. I get mad when I see stuff going on. So what do? I kind of ignore it. Because it ruins my day, it ruins my attitude, and yet it's also real in the world, isn't it? You can't ignore it. You've got to face reality. But it makes me feel hopeless and helpless. Do you carry any of these burdens? I know that I do. And I can even tell you this much. my children do. I mean, our home is far from perfect. Let me put that out there. Our home is far from perfect. And we struggle to balance the burdens and the struggles of life. And even my children experience this struggle when we're sitting around the dinner table when they come home from school and we're asking them about their day and we're trying to get them to not ignore us and figure out what's going on in their lives and the things that are affecting them. They struggle with certain issues. They struggle with relationships. They struggle with the way the world's ordered. They don't always understand it, and quite frankly, I don't either. But the question I asked myself this week as I was preparing this message is simply this. Is part of the reason I fail to understand it because I don't understand this concept of meekness and rest? Let me say it again. Is part of the reason I fail to understand the world because I fail to understand this commandment, this scripture about meekness and rest? See, it's interesting. All the pictures on my wall in my office, almost all of them, and they're probably the same pictures you have on your office, not literally, but figuratively, right? The family pictures, the group photos, the vacation. I got some great pictures on my office wall. There's one of Laurie and I out in Utah in Zion National Park with the red rocks and the canyon all around, and it is awesome. It's majestic. I've got my kids. One of them's like, just kind of like, hey, we're at the beach, be happy. And it's a really cool pose that they did, The other ones are like the studio poses where they got their hands like this, the way they never sit, and stuff. And everybody looks perfect and good, right? Because those are the pictures we have. You want to know which picture gets asked about most in my office? I'm not even going to tell you. I'm going to show you. Of all the pictures that get asked about most in my office, this is the picture right here that gets most commented on. And you know why, don't you? Because this is not your normal picture. Right? We don't put pictures up, for the most part, in our offices or in our houses of our child screaming their head off. And that's what it was. That is one of my children, I'll let you guess which one, at 3 months of age, who was not happy with having to be on their belly. That's all it was. Right? But I love the picture because it was real, so my wife blew it up for my birthday and gave it to me. Or the other picture that many of you have seen, there's a family picture, and we were in the middle of the photo shoot, but the best photo to come out of the photo shoot was when the photographer, it wasn't even a real photo shoot, hey friends, snapping pictures. She snapped a picture of us in between pictures, and we're all doing our own thing, and you can see it, and personalities are coming through because we're not all sitting there like, right? Because we were being real. It was that moment of reality where it snuck in. It's so counter to our Norman Rockwell view of the world. And I must share with you, I had a bit of an epiphany this morning as I walked to church in the pre-dawn hours. I usually come to church fairly early on Sunday mornings. And what I realized this morning is I go through the same routine every time I come out the side door of the parsonage yard. You know what the first thing I do when I'm walking to the church and it's night out is I look up. I look at the stars. But I'm curious to see the stars because even with all the light pollution of the stuff around here, even all the light pollution of the lights in the parking lot, I see some amazing skies just right up here sometimes. That's one of the things I love about living in this area. It is awesome. You know what I saw this morning? Jack squat. I mean, it was cloudy. You couldn't see anything. You couldn't see anything. There was a little bit of fog. It was incredibly humid. So I looked up. I saw nothing. So I'm walking down the street because there's no traffic at that point in the morning, or very little traffic at that point in the morning road. As I'm looking ahead of me, you know what I saw? I saw the cross on the steeple. And the light that's in the yard is shining on the steeple. So I didn't see the light. All I can see is the dark side of the cross. And it was beautiful. And I don't know why, it just was. It was just a really cool sight. And as I'm walking down the road, I'm focused on the cross. And as so often happens in our lives, as I'm focused on the cross, I heard some traffic. Like a big Jake brake, the guy with the semi going through, and you're just like, should be doing that, but it is what it is. And I heard another sound. And I went to look away, and my eyes stayed on the cross. And the reason my eyes stayed on the cross is because in my brain I was thinking, this is a really awesome moment of just the way it's lit up. And I can't describe it to you because it wouldn't do it justice. And I don't know why I felt this way. I just felt this way of just the way the cross looked. And I thought to myself, I had this revelation, if I take my eyes off the cross to find the trucker who's laying on the Jake brake, or the noise that's off in the distance, there's a good chance I'm not going to see him in the first place. And second place, why would I take my eyes off of something that seems at this moment in this time so beautifully perfect for something so incredibly irrelevant? And I thought to myself, I truly believe the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, Scott, this is a microcosm of your life. What I mean by saying this is a microcosm of your life, it's a microcosm of all of our lives, isn't it? We need to stay focused on the cross. And there's so many distractions and little things, whether important or seemingly insignificant, that pull, that tug, that grab at us from so many different angles, that demand our attention and demand us to look that way. And yet the cross is always before us. But we have a choice to make, don't we? We choose to keep looking and focusing on that cross, or we can choose to be grabbed by the distractions and the things in the world around us. As long as our focus is upon the cross, our distractions are minimized. The reason I want to talk this morning, I believe there are 3 interior burdens that we are susceptible to and are capable of attacking us all when it comes to this concept of meekness and rest. I'm going to keep them brief. The first burden we talked about before is called pride. This is the burden. This burden chains you to the labor of self-love and satisfies that little inner God within our being. The God that we call self, and it is difficult to appease. We've all got that little bit of God in us. But as followers of Christ, we were never meant to carry this burden called pride. You know what the anti-pride is? The solution, the remedy for pride is humility. The solution for pride is humility, much the same as meekness. It sets our priorities in line and orders our lives according to God's will, not our will. Humility is the anti-pride. The second burden is pretense. This is the burden that says you need to have all your stuff together. You need to have it in line. You must not show weakness. You must not show that there are any chinks on your armor. You must never let anyone know that you are not in complete control of your circumstances or your situation. You've got to have it all together. Pretense hides the ugliness of our inner selves because it fails to truly recognize our helplessness apart from God. This is why we are continually encouraged to approach God the same way little children did. I mean, isn't it fascinating? Our children's first Christmas, the first year they experience Christmas, they get gifts. And you all know it. What do they care about? The paper in the box. They don't give a rip about what's inside of it. They don't care. I mean, you can package up all the socks and underwear for the rest of their lives. It don't matter, right? Because it's all about the paper or the bow or the box. That's all they care about. It doesn't take the child long, does it? No more than a couple of years to figure out that if what's not inside of that wrapping isn't what they wanted, they're not very happy. It's no longer about the box or the wrapping. It's what's inside. And the only importance lies with what's inside that box getting what they wanted. It's based upon our values of perceived worth. This is what I think I need, so this is what I want, and if I don't get it, then I'm upset. Maybe not upset, but I'm certainly not going to put on the show and do the dance to act like I'm happy for what I didn't want. The question I have is, what if our perceived worth, what if our values are upside down? Because that's what Christ says in the Beatitudes. The third verb, artificiality. This goes hand in hand with pretense. We live in a culture that not only accepts artificiality, but applauds and lifts it up. There's a lot of doctors, plastic surgeons, that live in Beverly Hills and Hollywood, and I'm stereotyping right now, all over the country, but in areas such as that make an incredible amount of money doing work on body parts that aren't necessarily real. Right? We thin out our waist only to enlarge our chest and puff up our lips. We inject things into our faces, Botox, and I'm not saying you're good, you're bad, you're all in between. This is what we do. We nip, we tuck, we do this, we move stuff around, right? we are on the inside. Think about this one. Let me give you another example. Maybe this is a better example. Every magazine cover you looked at, you've ever seen, is usually somebody incredibly beautiful, right? They don't go around talent agencies, models, scouts going, you know what? You're an average Joe, or you've got a pretty nasty defect on your body somewhere. We're going to put you on the cover of our magazine. Like Cosmopolitan is not coming after me. Probably because it's a women's magazine, I believe it is anyway, right? Right? Even Sports Illustrated, they don't go looking for the ugly athletes to put on their cover. They go looking for the Michael Jordans. They go looking for the people like that. What blows me away about all that is, you know what they do? Once they take the pictures to get them on the magazine covers, they decide which picture they want on the cover and inside, and they lay it out. And you know what they do next? They airbrush them. They airbrush them. Whether it's a runway model from Europe or an athlete from America, the first thing they do is they airbrush it to get all the imperfections out. So what is the message that's being sent here? Even the most beautiful people in the world, as society deems beautiful, aren't beautiful enough. They're still not perfect enough. Artificiality. Three burdens that we are susceptible to: pride, pretense, and artificiality. And all three of these burdens will fall away the moment we present ourselves, our true selves, in a position of humility and surrender before the throne of God. We will then stop caring about what people think of us and start caring more about what God thinks of us. And let me tell you this much: apart from sin, we have nothing in our lives to be ashamed of. Apart from sin, we have nothing in our lives to be ashamed of. See, life apart from God states that these burdens are self-inflicted, that they are ours to carry. However, the Bible states that we are all inflicted with them, and we are meant to allow Christ to carry them alongside of us. Come to me, all you are weary, burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, friend. Meek and humble in heart, and you will find rest unto your souls. Meekness is our calling card, and rest is our reward. We live in a culture, too, that's kind of counter to this, in that we love to see people work hard. We love to see people pull themselves up by their bootstraps to get out of a rough situation. We esteem hard work. We esteem self-sacrifice. And yet we were meant to do it together. It's why we meet collectively on Sunday mornings. It's why we go to Sunday school and try and learn from one another. It's why we have small groups. It's why we serve together at different agencies. It's why we pick vegetables together sometimes. It's why we have work days outside sometimes. It's why we like to eat together. Absolutely. So next Sunday, come and eat. If you want to come from church beforehand, that'd be great too, but we'd love to see you here for the fellowship. Because that's part of being a body. It's why we camp together. Letting go of our burdens requires us to elevate the unseen above the seen. 1 John chapter 3, verses 1 through 3 says this: "How great is the love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God." And that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it did not know Him. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when He appears, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. Everyone who has his hope in Him purifies himself just as He is pure. And that, my friends, is encouragement. There's a band I'm digging on right now. The name of the band is called Red Collective. You may not have heard of them if you listen to Christian music. You've probably heard one or two of their songs before. They have a song called The Cost. The lyrics simply state this: "I've counted up the cost, and you are worth it." He goes on to say, "I do not need safety as much as I need you. You're dangerous, but Lord, you're beautiful. I'll chase you through the pain. I'll carry my cross, for real love is not afraid to believe." Can you agree with these words? And do you believe and live this way? And the song goes on to say these simple words in the chorus. I love it. It's so simple, but it's so good. "Jesus, take my all, 'cause you're worth everything." Jesus, take my all, because you, Jesus, are worth everything. It echoes the words of the Scripture. everything is, just want to remind you, our everything is not just our good. Our everything is not just our talents, our abilities, our successes. Our everything includes our failures, our darkest secrets, and things we don't want anybody to see or know. We cannot just look good on the exterior, but be unclean on the interior. We are all that way anyway. The question is, are you bringing your everything to God? Give it all to Him. Let's pray. Father, I pray that you would challenge us to bring our everything. Maybe the reason that we're not finding what we need in our lives is because we're not doing it. Maybe the reason we're not finding meekness and rest is because we're only bringing part of ourselves. Father, I'm speaking to myself right now. I'm just speaking to my house. Clean me from the inside out. I don't want to be that whitewashed tomb. I want to be that airbrush